I had originally intended to cover Candela Obscura with a standard type of review, telling you how to play the game, etc., etc. As I got further along with this, it became really clear that my critiques were becoming way, way too significant for me to just do a standard review without letting consumers know about the material that's actually just missing from this book. This game, in its current state, is an incomplete game. Real quick, let me get into my disclaimer before I really get into the review wholesale. Because of how this material presents itself and kind of what my critiques are, I'm going to be trying to stay on script as much as possible. I want to make sure that point for point, I'm addressing these in a written form rather than just me kind of, going at it at the camera. Here's my disclaimer here. After I did a read through of the book and formed an opinion, I asked other content creators what their experiences were like when they had anything but glowing praise for a Critical Role product. 3 of them told me to be prepared for death threats, and another told me to avoid it like the plague unless I wanted to damage my reputation in the TTRPG industry. All of this despite knowing for a fact that there are people who will still buy this thing, open it once, and let it collect dust on their shelves. I'm doing this review because there are non-subjective problems with this game. I don't think compliance under the threat of violence or industry blacklisting is acceptable. I am not saying Critical Role are themselves responsible for these types of reactions, and this review isn't some kind of punishment for their fans' behavior. There are plenty of people in the credits of this book who I highly respect and have even discussed working with, but this is a game with legitimate problems. Problems worth discussing so that we can learn from the mistakes and keep consumers informed of their purchasing decisions. I hope our hobby hasn't degraded so far as to be unwilling to allow scrutiny. So I am mostly going to be staying on script for this one. I do have a book cam that we'll see right here. Bingo bango. If I need to show some examples or explain a little bit about the system, I'll be going over here. But for the most part, I do want to be talking at the camera and staying on script here. So in 2023, Critical Role announced, developed, and published Candela Obscura, their first of a trilogy of tabletop games announced in the wake of the OGL crisis. While Wizards of the Coast is out here making enemies out of, well, everyone, Critical Role built a team of rockstar designers in tabletop for their games division, Darrington Press, and announced active development on their new system, Illuminated Worlds. When I heard they hired industry darling Spencer Stark to design a new TTRPG for them, you could say my interest was piqued. Over time, it was revealed that this game would be our first look at the Illuminated World system and was apparently a Victorian mystery game that they had an actual play planned to showcase. When the quick start dropped in May, we learned that this was to be a cosmic horror mystery game that would tread the same waters of games like Call of Cthulhu, Monster of the Week, and Dyson, wherein you take on the role of an investigator who has been brought in as a member of a secret, likely occult society. It was rocky roads from the get-go for Candela Obscura when comparisons were made between it and John Harper's Blades in the Dark, and it hasn't been able to successfully remove that stigma. While an acknowledgement for the inspiration does appear and John Harper has publicly endorsed this adaptation, it didn't halt the onslaught of questions, criticisms, and accusations of laziness that continue to this day. We're going to be getting into my dissection of the game, but as a quick summary, Candela Obscura simply doesn't have the ludonarrative innovation to justify itself in an already saturated genre. It spends way too much of its page count trying to say the right thing rather than doing the right thing, making the entire affair feel like a pretentious lecture of potentially prejudiced themes in gaming. What's here is an intriguing setting with smart artwork choices, such as the use of field observation style sketches for the more gory pieces to keep things less bloody and edgy, but it fails to earn its place at the table. Horror and tabletop roleplay is already dominated by the likes of Call of Cthulhu, Mothership, and Dyson, and Candela Obscura is too fraught with errors and doesn't bring anything new to make me want to clear some shelf space. This would have been infinitely better served as a campaign setting rather than its own boutique Victorian Blades in the Dark rule set, serving as a hollow pastiche of Dyson. In summary, this is a d6 based dice pool system with a success gradient. You generally succeed in an action you're taking by rolling a 4 or higher, and you take the highest result of any of the d6s rolled in the pool to determine the result. You determine the amount of dice in the pool by seeing how many points you have in the related action. Alright, so this character right here has 2 points in survey. So what that means is I'm going to take 2 d6s right here, roll them, and because one rolled a 4, this isn't actually like a guaranteed, absolute, incredible success. This is called a mixed success, if I'm getting that right. A 6 on the die would essentially mean Yep, the action definitely takes place. There's no complication, whatever. Very, powered by the apocalypse style. There are other ways in which you'll be able to add more dice to this, such as allies helping you out. Maybe the situation necessitates that you're able to get another die, or maybe you're spending drive in order to add to that, and we'll get to drive here in just a second. So it distinguishes itself from Blades in the Dark with the Gilded Die, which is a special d6 that you can roll during an action in place of one of the other d6s if that action is gilded for you, which is indicated by the diamond on the left of the action. So right here on this character sheet, this character is gilded in strike, right? So that means they would normally roll 2d6 for this, but we can replace one of them with this gilded die right here, right? Now, when we roll these two dice, okay, so I rolled a 4 and a 3. Now, I could take the 4, but the gilded die right here, I could take this instead, and if I possibly fail as a result of taking that, I would still replenish a resource that I have called drive. So why would you want to replenish drive? Drive can be spent to add to the pool of an action roll that corresponds to that drive. For example, my 2 points in survey gives me a 2d6 to the roll for that action, but if I spend 1 drive from intuition, I gain an additional d6 to add, making it 3d6 in total. Your character's drive is replenished from the gilded die mechanic and through recovering and training between assignments. For me, I almost wrote a section in here about thinking that the latter half of the drive regeneration just wasn't in the game. It's not really included super clearly in the quick start rules. This is a part of, this should be on 41. Hey, what do you know? It says in here, assign resource points. This is whenever you're creating your circle. This is like your group that you're hanging out with, right? Assign your resource points. This is the only place where it says that you do actually refresh all of your uses of drive on your PC in between sessions and whatnot. I think that this didn't really need to be tucked away back in here in the creating a circle section. I don't see a reason why this couldn't have been added in here. As a layout artist, I see that there could have been plenty of room we could have made to make this happen. In addition to those, there's also a resistance mechanic, which is essentially a get out of jail free card for when the GM decides the plot needs you to take damage. I say this because the combat is basically don't track hit points mentality, but codified. This right here was the moment that Candela Obscura absolutely lost me. I don't feel any sort of legitimacy or tension behind enemies that choose violence here. Other systems that this game takes shots at have more interesting ideas for handling this that don't require as much of this railroady combat goes on until the GM says so mentality in more intriguing ways. It makes this known to the player characters in the rulebook. It's this page right here, page 165 in the rulebook. Players are also probably going to be seeing the rulebook. If they read the entire game, they'll be aware that this section does exist. So I don't know, the sleight of hand required in order to make combat and marks, this don't track hit points type of mentality feel satisfying really in any way, at least in my opinion. It's lost on the fact that you told people right here there isn't a combat system. It's basically just the GM decides how combat's going to go. So like if you do die in combat, like the combat's going to necessitate it for whatever reason. I don't know. This just feels so odd. This makes it known to the player characters in the rulebook, so it already showed the magician's secrets off to the player characters. Vaesen has an incredibly interesting aspect to combat that rewards discovering weaknesses and rituals that makes this entire chapter of combat feel like homework turned in 5 years too late. I guess the absolutely abysmal combat makes sense considering they apparently omitted PC death mechanics, or at least entirely forgot them in their first print. This game spends so long lecturing you on when and when not to hurt a player character, they forgot entirely what happens whenever a player character gets hurt too much, apparently. But yeah, in the first print, a game is missing its failure state. This is also true of the initial quick start and has been patched in through an errata, but I can't help but speculate that this was an intentional decision until they got pressed on it. What they inserted was essentially one for one the mechanics from Blades in the Dark, but it's pretty clear they aren't comfortable committing to the idea that the game should tell you to die. What they have in the errata is fine, and I don't think that you have to have death to make a game risky, but this feels like a pretty significant and unintentional omission. I'll go over real quick essentially what this should be. You are not taking damage that is going to detract from your health necessarily. You are taking what are called marks. So this is like if I take a hit, and let's say there's a physical hit, it's going to go against a body, right? If I accumulate 3 of these marks, I'm going to take a scar, bam, right there. I would then erase the marks, and then that scar stays on there. If over time I accumulate 4 scars, you see how there's only 3 right here. This is what kind of makes me think that this might have been an unintentional omission, but yeah. So if you accumulate 4 scars, apparently you die, or they do give you the way of saying, like, my character is going to retire, or otherwise is exiting the story in some manner. But this is the problem, it does not appear in the first print. That means that this game, in its current form, is missing its failure state, which is, if it sounds like a nitpick, I don't know really what to say. Honestly, I think they might have just missed the opportunity here to not only distinguish Candela Obscura from its predecessors, but explore a unique horror that we don't often see, the horror of immortality. The errata means this absolutely wasn't the thing they wanted to do with it, but the spark is definitely there. I think that this could have actually been a pretty interesting experience, that they could have said, you know what, we don't really like death in the game, but if you want to make a horror game, they could have made the artistic choice to say you don't die, but actually explore why that is and why that could be an interesting thing. I'm not. I hate all of this like intention fishing here. I don't really want to just like conspiracy theory like speculate or whatnot, but it was really odd, you know. With the my other critique on this is just the user experience of this book is pretty poor. This layout is pretty, but I feel the organization of information isn't always intuitive for character creation. They grouped all roles and specialties together with the type of information you need, rather than sorting the information you need on a page of that role and specialty with the other information distributed throughout the book. This sounds confusing. I'll show you what I mean here. As someone who makes a large chunk of my income off layout design, I'm not sure why they decided to parse it out this way over the span of 30 pages, rather than make all the information clear in the same section like what Blades in the Dark did. So, look, I'll show you here. So, let's just say I want to make a character that's a soldier, right? The information I need on my sheet could easily fit on one page. We know that this is one of the things you can do with a system like this, because if I go over to Blades in the Dark, if I say one page, it's because of the like size of the Candela Obscura book, right? Compared to Blades in the Dark, it is a bigger book, but if I go over to the playbooks right here, Hound, this is essentially the role and specialty, right? So it's the role, there's my starting actions, daily friends, rivals, starting builds, yada, yada, yada. Going onto this page right here, this is where I'm going to get my abilities, Hound items, etc., right? Going over to Candela Obscura. I don't know why they split it up like this. All right, so starting out, I need to go to page 21. All right. This puts me on the role of muscle, and I've got soldier right here. Okay. Now, I need to flip over to page 25. That page 21 is mostly just flavor text and lore stuff, I guess, inspiration, so take it or leave it. Page 25 is telling me what my specialty action ratings are. This is what I mean by they grouped everything up by all of the specialties rather than splitting it up and saying on this page they have the specialty yada yada yada. So now you're having to flip around. Page 26, specialty drives and gilded actions. Those are right here in these tables. Muscle abilities are on page 27. So luckily that's bam right there. Soldier abilities are going to be over here on page 29. And then my illumination keys, which is admittedly the intriguing leveling system that they did and like put into the game, is all the way back on page 54, right here. So the advancement system feels a bit like a hodgepodge of Blades in the Dark and Vaesen. So what they have here is intriguing. The illumination keys that you need are right up here. You're going to put these on the bottom portion right there of your character sheet. So yeah, I don't know why all of this information couldn't have been put on one spread. That I don't know. This seems like a really kind of baffling layout decision here. It's unintuitive by design, especially whenever Blades in the Dark already did the more natural layout of the information. This isn't Critical Role's first rodeo in print production, so this had to be an intentional choice. If you feel like this is a nitpick, that's fine, but it's something that I feel hurts the overall accessibility of the character creation. After I read Candela Obscura, I did do a side-by-side comparison of this game and Blades in the Dark, so if you want a clear-cut answer to the question, is Candela Obscura just Blades in the Dark? The answer is kind of. It's the same resolution mechanics, palette swaps of other mechanics, a non-Dusk Bowl setting and aesthetic for the game, as well as a changing concept for investigative horror mechanics. There are numerous similarities, but it's disingenuous to try and frame it as if Critical Role was trying to get away with plagiarism. They went about doing this in an ethical way and brought on the Blades in the Dark crew for contributions. Despite all this, Candela Obscura has still managed to be less than its predecessor, and feels even more less than when you consider it wasn't trying to be Blades in the Dark. It wasn't even trying to be Call of Cthulhu. What this game wants to be is Dyson, a game that just crossed over its 3-year birthday and continues to take home ENnies year after year. This is where I get most hung up on reading through Candela Obscura. Every time I make it through a mechanic, I'm just reminded of how much better I feel like Dyson achieves these concepts. Like, literally, this game could have been so cool, and I would have been way more stoked about it if they had used the Dyson engine, because it's... yeah. Now, I'm going to get into a portion here that I think some people may not like. That's fine. I do think that this needs to be critiqued, and the refusal to critique it in the TTRPG scene has led to a cloud of toxic positivity that really ruins our scene. The thing that you don't do as a game creator is tell your audience how not to run their games. You can't prevent someone from role-playing a horrible person. You can hold yourself to an ethical standard of not gamifying things that your predecessors did that you feel may deserve critique and now find unconscionable, but it's ridiculous to think that you're preventing racism through creating a TTRPG and preemptively lecturing readers of your text. An argument could be made that Candela Obscura would rather take things away from pre-established titles currently still seeing mainstream play in a near narcissistic way. That's the bizarre thing. It attempts to knock its sources of inspiration down a peg. Seriously, it's the first game I've seen where the designers went out of their way to dig at other games they credit as inspiration. Now, this is not in this print book. I think that they may have gotten some pushback on this, but this was on page 9 of the quick start. So what this said was, in our experience, role-playing insanity is neither ethical or mechanically viable. In case some of you are wondering out there who heard about this line of text, it is not in the book anywhere. It would have been on, where was it, the Harm and Horror? Yes, it would have been in here on Harm and Horror. However, I will say it has, this spread right here is incredibly preachy and pretentious. This line of text probably wouldn't be so insufferable. It is still on the quick start guide, by the way, but it probably would not be so insufferable if they hadn't literally gamified disabilities on the same page. I'm going to riff off of a point brought up by Justin Alexander in his fantastic review of the quick start. It's going to be linked down below. But as a physically disfigured and disabled person, I have to ask, Critical Role, why did you all feel it was ableist to mechanically express and otherwise gamify mental disabilities, but it was fine to do so with physical disabilities? At this point, the quick start is dated to May 30th, making it just over 5 months old, and this whole portion of your rule set hasn't been addressed over there. I actually firmly disagree with the premise that the themes of madness can't somehow be expressed in the game. Dyson does this without muss or fuss. I don't want to get into all of that in here because this is supposed to be focused on Candela Obscura. However, I will say that I have never heard anybody bring up an issue with the way that Dyson tackled these themes, because they give you the disclaimer right up front. Hey, this is a horror game. This is one of the aspects of it. We're not trying to tell you how to or not to run this with your table or whatever, but this is one of the themes, right? It's almost like this is trying to convince you not to play it, and the over-sanitized, hyper-editorialized passages constantly reminding you that the games of this genre are problematic just comes off as preachy, moralistic grandstanding. This is the difficulty with critiquing outspokenly progressive media as a progressive. It would be so much easier to say what I want to say if I was some right-wing grognard nut job, but no, I just had to be born with empathy and a weakness for socialism and femboys. I'm not disappointed here because there's no bigotry in the game. I'm disappointed because I spent $40 on a book with missing rules that would rather preemptively lecture me as if I was super down with bigotry. This sucks because there's a legitimate conversation to be had about these topics in the game industry, and I don't think it was handled tastefully or tactfully here at all. There's 2 passages right here that I feel come off as preachy. Again, kind of assuming that, like, of course, this is what people would do with the genre rather than, like, whatever. Here's the deal. I think that there's a conversation to be had about these, and we could have that, but, like, I don't think that they handled it well over here. Somehow they managed to come off as condescending, and, like, they know the absolute answer in a way. I think that this is an ongoing discussion, not one that these people should really try and make the claim of whatever. I don't really get why in a horror game you would go so far as to tell people how not to play it rather than like just saying, here's the system. Having the okay, having the delusion that you can solve for racism or prevent people from playing the game in whatever way that they want to because you said otherwise in your rules. I don't think that this is the way to handle this. I just don't. I don't want to go through this book passage for passage and say where I feel it's kind of odd because we're talking about in some ways the tone of the passage and then in other ways we're talking about the actual message. But I feel like I've seen too many right-wing nut jobs take copies of like Radiant Citadel and try and say it was woke garbage. And that feels a little bit icky for me to try and do specifically here. But I will say I don't really appreciate the tone in which this game tries to condescend to players here or whatever. There are ways to have the conversation about the problems of this genre, and this ain't it. Unfortunately, Critical Role's first outing in the TTRPG creation space is a puddle claiming to be an ocean. It spends entirely too much of its page count telling you how not to play it, and not enough telling people how to play it. I mean, that's literal here. There's at least a page worth of core rules just missing from the first print. My guess here is that Critical Role most likely wanted an in-house system that they knew that they would have complete creative control over. As far as the death mechanics being omitted, maybe you could say that they thought that there was going to be a bad fan reaction like what happened with the death of other characters in the campaigns. I don't know. I think that that's a fan issue rather than a Critical Role or a TTRPG issue. But yeah, I think it's absolutely fine as someone that's making my own system to try and maintain creative control over what it is that you're making. But like, I believe most people were probably expecting a bit more out of Illuminated Worlds than minor tweaks on Forged in the Dark. The market's full of Powered by the Apocalypse clones and derivatives, so something that breaks away from a reskin and innovates on the DICE role-playing game formula is more likely to get sustained play than this right here. To be clear, I understand the reluctance one has when citing H.P. Lovecraft as a source of inspiration. The man had reprehensible views, but acting like the guy is Voldemort just feels childish. I promise if you say his name 3 times, the world doesn't suddenly become a more racist place. Vaesen was able to pull off this plot without mentioning Lovecraft once, but they had an incredibly strong concept to supplement the cosmic horror omission. I don't know how they managed to write a tabletop role-playing game that feels like it's trying to lecture you like a short-sighted Twitter poster. I'm all for some reasonable discussion going on about the effectiveness of certain safety tools, but the way it goes about discussing potentially troublesome themes of these types of games feels more patronizing than informative. Seriously, it's like the game tries to convince you not to even play it, and their own suggestions are even contradictory and potentially ableist by their own definition. It's not terrible as a Blades in the Dark supplement, but it seems to be shoehorning in way too much from Vaesen and other Call of Cthulhu likes to get close to the feel, but keep it in-house. I'm aware that's a sort of assumption about the intentions of the creators, but Vaesen's fingerprints are everywhere on this thing. I would have been unbelievably excited to have seen the Critical Role Free League collaboration, but it feels like everyone is chasing independent TTRPG success with a proprietary system rather than attempting to collaborate. If it feels like the Vaesen thing is a stretch, it isn't just Blades in the Dark that they attribute to inspiring the game. Literally, Vaesen right here. Yeah, it's there right on the page. This review isn't making any accusations, by the way. Taking inspiration from a thing and reinterpreting it is absolutely a valid means of content creation, but I don't need to harp on the lack of twisting the yoink to show some serious problems with this book. That's going to be it for my review of Candela Obscura. I don't really recommend this one, especially in its first print. This is going to be an odd one. I know that this is probably going to get me some flack in the scene. I would like to be able to talk about this stuff without feeling that concern, but yeah, so anyways, that's going to be it. I think I have been fair on this. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. And